So remember I told you that basically there were two avenues that I wanted to take when I left Harrods the first time. So I wanted to either go into the selling part or to the buying part. But I knew at the time, obviously, that I didn't have any buying and merchandising skills, so I went on to the selling side. But now, fast forward, and I'd had a few years of, learning about sourcing, obviously traveling to all these Italian brands, understanding the number side of it, really looking at, different, ways to manage a business and sort of more the analytical side, let's say, or the financial side and the merchant side of it. I thought, well, okay, perhaps I can go now and learn about really the buying side of it. So I sat around and thought, where's the best place to go learn about buying? And none other than Harrods, of course. And I knew that if I could land a job, buying for Harrods, well, that would be another feather in the cap, wouldn't it? Because, buying Harrods, one store, all these products in it, and being one of the buyers in this department store was a huge accolade, of course, to anyone's career. And so, but I had no experience specifically in buying. So at the time I saw that there was a vacancy basically in the accessories department for a buyer. And I thought, okay, well, let me apply and let me put in all the other experience that I'd had, taken with me over the last few years, and let me see if I can at least get an interview. Well, bizarrely or not, I did get an interview with them. And then I went and spoke to sort of the recruitment manager, and I told her about my experience and how I've been traveling and sourcing products and then selling them and all of that. And she was very impressed. Again, I had, confidence. I had a lot of passion, and I did have knowledge, and I did have a skill set to give to them. And I was very honest as well. And I was very candid. And I said, look, I don't specifically have, any experience in the product category that you're looking for as a buyer, but I can certainly bring my skill set to it. And then the other thing that I did have, specifically the role was for their jewelry department and costume jewelry and accessories. And when I grew up, like I told you, a lot of my mother was inspiring me constantly, in fashion and in color and that. But also as a teenager, I was obsessive with vintage costume jewelry and would collect it and would travel around all over the UK, really all hours of the day, going to vintage fairs and sourcing. So I, on a personal side, was obsessed in the world of costume jewelry and reading about it and collecting it and going to fairs, and sort of on a personal side, always sort of interested in that and accessories. And I would, collect like 19th century bags and all of these things. And so, and my sister hugely influenced me in that, and she taught me about sort of the whole point of being eclectic way back then in the 80s, when it wasn't really all about brands, and she would mix products up, and she'd go to vintage fairs with me, and I bought the first 1950s vintage handbag when I was with her. And so I had this sort of natural appreciation and love for all of this, but not an actually structured career or understanding in it. So when I went for the different roles, I told them all the knowledge that I had about the world of costume jewelry and about the great vintage designers that I loved. And then I'd spend a lot of time before the interviews going to the department store itself, looking at the different, standing there and sort of observing the customers, really trying to understand the brands that Harrods were selling, asking the salespeople why things were going. So I did a lot of pre-homework before I went to each interview. So every time that I'd go to an interview, I would, have some constructive comments to talk about. And I spent a lot of time in the libraries and looking at books and, learning about Monet and learning about Swarovski and learning about all of that. So every time I went for an interview, I would talk to them about the knowledge and my opinion of what I thought the department was missing and everything. And so through a number of, again, grueling interviews, I actually managed to get the job. And let me tell you, I guess that's probably my first real turnaround. Now, we spoke earlier about my first intro to entrepreneurism, and this was my first intro to turnaround, because the department hadn't made any sort of profits or money. It wasn't really doing great for a number of years, and it hadn't seen the glory days of the 1980s. And there was a brand that I used to love and still love today called Butler & Wilson. And for those of you who know, Butler & Wilson is sort of like this multi-brand store of costume jewelry and vintage bags and accessories. And it's like this treasure chest and cave of all of these beautiful, you know, brooches and earrings and necklaces and bags and everything. And I remember when I used to go to Harrods, Butler & Wilson would have this huge island in the middle, and that was where, you know, it would be packed with people buying, you know, all of their product. And then when I was going to Harrods then for this job, there wasn't that livelihood there. There wasn't, you know, Butler & Wilson wasn't there, that quality of brand wasn't there, that sort of pizzazz, that charisma of the department store, that energy wasn't. It was a lot of sort of mass brands, let's say, or brands that weren't very exclusive, that were carried in other department stores. So there wasn't anything really unique. You know, the salespeople looked like they were sort of bored because obviously they're not working with particularly exciting product. So the first thing that I did, and that's why I say it was a turnaround, because it was a total revamp of this quite big space on the ground floor, prominent in Harrods. And it was, you know, sort of a big deal for me because it was a huge responsibility. But what was fantastic in Harrods is that it was a centralized buying, you know, so the buyers had to actually, their offices were on the shop floor. So that meant that I could, you know, be out there with my teams, be hands-on with the customers, which I loved, you know, and understand, you know, firsthand on what the challenges were, why we weren't doing so well, why we weren't performing. And as a buyer, along with the floor manager, you were responsible for your team. So I had, you know, sort of 25 salespeople that were reporting into me. And then obviously I had my buying team, my merchandising team, which was frantically trying to understand, you know, the complexities of merchandising, the number crunching and allocations and buying. And at the same time being involved, you know, also as a business owner, because that's the other thing that I learned. Autonomy and empowerment is what Harrods gave you, because they would say, right, this is your department, this is your business, you run it as if it were your own business and make sales and make it happen. So the first, you know, few weeks I was fully immersed in, first of all, understanding, you know, my sales team and getting to know them because of all the learnings that Harrods had given me before, and that importance of engaging with your store teams. And this time I was coming into it as a different position because now I was a manager. And so I understood how important it was as a manager to connect with my sales team on the floor, and how the fired used to come in, or my managers used to speak to us. So I used that and would, you know, engage with my teams and get to know them and really listen what it is, because they were the ones day to day interacting with my customers. So I would listen to them and they would tell me stories about bestsellers of the past and brands that would come in that would want to sell, and then previous buyers didn't take them on. So I got a lot of knowledge. And then the other thing that Harrods had taught me in the past and the fired was the whole brand experience. And there I was in this department that had lackluster. You know, the fittings, all of the fittings were quite old. The carpet was dated. The walls hadn't really been painted. There wasn't any sound system. And I was, you know, one, surprised, and two, thought, my gosh, you know, if this is not a priority department, though it should be because it's on the ground floor, visually I need to make it, you know, one, really motivating for my teams to come in to work every day and for my customers. So I would wait one morning for my CEO at the time, and he would come and sort of do the morning walk through all of the department store, and I stood there a little bit nervous, maybe a lot nervous, and I waited for my moment, and he asked me about my department, and I said to him, well, I've just joined, you know, 4 weeks ago, and can you give me some budget, you know, to paint the ceiling and to change the carpet? And I really think we need to do things over and above the product. We need to really build this environment. Of course, there's a huge gasp from the directors that were with him. They're like, oh, how can you ask him directly for money like that? And I was obviously naive, but also very confident. And I promised him, I said, if you give me that little bit of budget, and I will come in on the weekend and I will actually paint it myself, and I'm gonna literally burn the CD myself and download the music. If you just let me do that, I promise you I'm going to turn this around and make money for you. He was an amazing guy, and he's like, that's a deal? And I'm like, that's a deal, please. So they literally gave me a little budget, and I, obviously got the store, maintenance people to come in over a weekend, and they changed the carpet, and we all the sales team got together and scrubbed the glass and all the cabinets, and then, we gave the paint, they uploaded a sound system. And then all of a sudden there was a transformation of the space because, the lighting, we fixed the lighting, we had music, my team was energized, the environment was great, customers were it was creating a buzz. And then of course there was a product side, and I knew from my experience of Harrods way back, and like I said, with Butler and Wilson and these gorgeous products, why didn't we have any exclusive products? Why didn't we have any unique products? Why didn't we recreate that island where we had all of this sort of multi-brands in it? And so I started on this journey, of course, again, very little on Google back then, of trying to scout these emerging designers, because I thought, well, we did have Dior and we did have YSL and we had Givenchy and we had all these luxury brands. But at the same time, I wanted, and they were carried by other department stores in our competition as well. So I wanted to create more a sense of exclusivity. So I wanted to bring in sort of this new generation of really cool kids. And so it started with me way back then. So I went and I sort of Googled the little that there was on Google, and, looked through sort of research on old books, and found this sort of new gen of brands that was sort of emerging in costume jewelry and accessories. And then of course I was traveling also. I was traveling to Paris, I was traveling to New York, and I would always gravitate towards, the smaller booths at the fairs and the really quirky brands and those that were more sort of interesting and had a storytelling. And then little by little, as I was purchasing these new brands and layering all of these brands, the department stores started to really have this energy and started to have this buzz, because we had, new brands, which Harrods had taught me, exclusive brands, unique destination brands. We were not competing anymore. We were leading in the competition. We had the right environment. My store teams were incredibly energized, and all of these new brands would come in and train my store staff. So suddenly there was this whole new energy in the department store. And all the time I wasn't focusing obviously just on the numbers. Clearly that was my day-to-day job, looking at the merchandising, looking at the numbers, looking at the purchasing. But that was not my driver. That was not leading this turnaround that I promised my CEO. It was everything else. It was being on the shop floor, being with my customers, motivating my sales team, looking at newness, looking at uniqueness, and understanding for myself, wow, this is how you turn around in my own way. Didn't read it in a book. My logic, my learnings taught me that if you sort of put all of those together, you might have a winning formula. Every single vertical, the people side, the training side, the product side, the customer side, the experience side, then it could be a win-win. And then bam, 9/11 happened. And it was a shock to the world, and obviously everything, not too dissimilar today, grounded to a halt. Harrods is a #1 destination. Obviously tourism was a huge part of the institution, and a driving for its revenue. And then suddenly, gosh, everything quietened down. There weren't that many tourists. Obviously people, shopping was not on their mindset, and it was not a priority. And there it was, I'd created this amazing space, and everything stopped. And then I thought to myself, well, oh my gosh, do we just, that's it? Do we just ride this wave of, quietness? All this effort, I have to keep my teams motivated. I have to continue on the effort that I'd worked so hard on. So I thought, okay, well, let's wait till sort of things start to settle, and then let me think innovatively, let me think creatively, let me think disruptively. What if I held in the most unusual circumstance and time, a great event in my department, inviting all of these new designers with the brands, and they can all come and sort of be there physically like a trunk show, selling their products and engaging with our customers and creating this sort of animated experience and bringing a positive message in a very difficult time, and sort of this camaraderie of everyone coming together in the space and celebrating and trying to, you know, turn this into a, you know, to turn back and so slowly the wheel, and convincing these brands when no one was traveling, because they were in the US and they were in Europe. And I'm like, guys, if we can all come together united, and you know, would you? And I had zero money, I had no budget for PR, no budget for marketing, literally nothing except the power of my negotiation skills. Is, you know, would you consider coming out, you know, paying for your flights and your accommodation and spending sort of 2 days with us? And they were all like, wow, this is a huge ask and it's a difficult time. And I'm like, if you do this, it's obviously beneficial to you, and it will help this engine continue as we ride this wave and give sort of this positivity. So after convincing these brands, they all agreed to come. And so I then, with no knowledge on what marketing and PR was really all about, I went upstairs to my marketing team and the PR team, and I'm like, guys, I've got this crazy idea, but if we can sort of do this sort of marketing event and we can bring models in and I can, you know, pull some favors, and let's try to do like 1-day event. And all of these brands were like asking me, you know, what, you know, are we going to get to meet the Fired? And I was like, well, I'll try my best, you know, it's not a guarantee, but I'm certain if he feels the energy and buzz and he loves that entertainment, you'll definitely meet him. So we sort of organized with the marketing team and organized with the PR team and created with really no budget, a small budget where I could sort of bring all the brands and at least feed them lunch and give them a dinner, but really create this hype. And I invited all of these brands to come in for 2 days, and there they were, and I'll show you the photos. And it was incredible because I had, you know, famous brands with emerging designers, and they were all on the shop floor with my sales team, with the customers, and balloons and cupcakes and, you know, sparkles and everything. And unbelievable, we actually slam dunked the revenues that day and for that, you know, good few weeks. And we turned that department back, and the energy and the enthusiasm and the motivation and everybody sort of coming together was incredible to witness. And you know, the Fired heard about this crazy fuss that was going on in our department, and he, you know, he called me upstairs to his office and he's like, what's going on downstairs? And I'm like, well, I had this crazy idea, and you taught me about exclusivity and uniqueness and experience and brand, and I had this crazy idea of inviting all of these designers to come in unity from all over the world and do this trunk show and sort of energize my teams and energize sort of as much as I could, you know, the times that we were in. And he was like, well, what can I do for you? This is incredible, and I'm seeing your sales coming in. He's like, this is unprecedented, you know, what can I do? And I said, would you please sort of come down and meet these brands, because that's the one thing they all asked. And he was like, absolutely. I couldn't believe it. So we went downstairs, myself and the Fired and his team, and he spent, you know, a good few hours meeting every single brand, meeting the customers, participating, you know, listening to their stories and being fully engaged with me. And I was, you know, speechless really, and overwhelmed with, one, my chairman basically hanging out with me all those hours, and really then me sort of delivering on my promise to, you know, my brands that they actually got to meet him, and then of course to my teams, which were on such a buzz. And then, you know, that whole energy that we managed to create. And I guess the one lesson learned for me specifically, that I then knew that even when it was a tough environment, and even if the world had stood still, and even with all of the challenges, that I knew, wow, this is a turnaround. That with people, with investing in their training, investing in their environment, you know, investing in brands, when you have a unique offer, when you have exclusivity, you create this experience, when you market it right, you PR it right, and you genuinely all together come together to deliver this objective that you're going to win. And, you know, before I sort of end on this chapter of my career, you know, that department was 150% up, and it had never seen. Obviously, then things settled and it continued doing incredibly well. And that for me was a huge achievement in my career, because I delivered my first turnaround. And it wasn't I who delivered it, you know, genuinely myself, we and my team and all my partners and everybody around me, that I understood through a leadership style that I had as well, because I was learning about myself. So I understood through my leadership, my management style, I guess you call it management style, but of course there is that leadership, you know, aligning, and then not being able, you know, not being afraid to ask what I needed and getting that support, and then bringing everybody together. We did turn it around and it became a huge success. And I'm very proud to say today that, you know, a lot of the emerging brands that I bought have become hugely successful brands today, global brands as a matter of fact, because I enabled them, you know, I opened the doors for them to come to Harrods and supported them. And I guess that's also where my love started for emerging talent and brand. So that sort of brings us nicely to the closing chapter of certainly my time with, you know, within sales, within Harrods, with the learnings that I've had from the buying side and the creative side and the product side and the sourcing side, and sort of it will lead me on to, you know, of course, other moments in my career, which I'll continue to talk about in creative part of my shop floor to CEO.